No one raised their voice. That was what made it worse. 7 men stood frozen along the edge of the mat as a Navy SEAL leaned close to Bruce Lee and whispered, "Show me your true strength." Bruce did not answer. He did not step back. He did not lift his hands. He simply held the man's eyes. The room tightened around that silence. Boots stopped shifting. Breathing slowed. A towel slipped from someone's shoulder and hit the floor. The SEAL straightened, waiting for anger, waiting for defense, waiting for something. Bruce gave him nothing. Only calm, only stillness, only a quiet presence that began changing the air before a single movement was made. What followed would not become legend because of violence. It would be remembered because one man arrived ready to prove himself and left having seen himself for the first time. The room was already quiet when it happened. Bruce Lee had just finished guiding a young operator through a simple defensive sequence. His hands moved with care, correcting an elbow, adjusting foot placement. His voice stayed low, even measured. 7 men stood around the mat in a loose half circle. No cameras, no spectators. Just breath and the faint hum of overhead lights. Bruce stepped back. The trainee nodded and moved away. That was when the Navy SEAL crossed the floor. Boots against rubber matting. Slow, deliberate. No one spoke. Bruce felt him before he saw him. The shift in weight behind him, the way the air tightened. He turned calmly, towel resting across his shoulder, eyes lifting without surprise. The SEAL stopped close, too close. He leaned in, just enough that only Bruce could hear. "Show me your true strength." It was not shouted. It was not angry. It was quiet. The kind of quiet that carries years of pressure behind it. Bruce did not answer. He did not move. He did not blink. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. A man near the wall swallowed. Another adjusted his stance, then froze when he realized no one else was moving. Somewhere behind them, a metal water bottle tipped over and rolled softly before settling against the baseboard. Bruce held the SEAL's eyes, not with challenge, not with pride, with presence. The SEAL straightened, waiting for resistance, waiting for bravado, waiting for posture. Bruce gave him none. He simply stood there, hands relaxed, shoulders loose, breath steady. A single drop of sweat slid from Bruce's jaw and fell to the mat. The SEAL shifted his weight, resetting his feet without realizing it. His jaw tightened, his chest rose and fell once, deeper than before. Bruce lifted his towel and folded it slowly. Each movement was unhurried. He handed it to one of the observers without looking away from the man in front of him. That small action did something to the room. No one could explain it later, but they would all agree on this: the power changed right there. The SEAL rolled his shoulders. Bruce took one step back, not retreat, invitation. The SEAL hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. Bruce waited, eyes calm, body open. No stance, no guard, only stillness. The men watching felt it in their chests. A tightening, a quiet pull forward. No one breathed loudly anymore. The SEAL finally raised his hands. Bruce remained exactly where he was. The moment stretched. And in that stretch, something irreversible began. The room did not feel like a gym. It felt like a place where mistakes stayed on the floor. A private training facility tucked behind a plain door. Far from the main buildings, no windows on the mat space. Fluorescent lights that never warmed. A faint smell of leather, disinfectant, and old sweat pressed into the padding. The men around Bruce were not there to be impressed. They were there to evaluate, to absorb, to take what worked and leave what did not. Their faces held the same controlled blankness Bruce had seen in fighters his whole life, the look of people trained not to show what they felt. But the challenge had cracked that discipline. Nobody said a word, yet everyone stepped into a better position to watch. One man drifted closer to the wall, as if giving the center more room. Another subtly moved behind a support pillar, not hiding, just choosing an angle. A third lifted his hand to scratch his chin, then stopped halfway and let his arm fall again, like his body had forgotten what to do during waiting. Bruce stood in the center with the SEAL in front of him. He had stepped back once. He did not step again. The SEAL's breathing was louder now, though he tried to hide it. He shifted his feet, toe to heel, testing the traction. His shoulders rose, lowered, rose again. Bruce watched without any visible response. The silence did not soften. It sharpened. A loose end of tape on the mat edge fluttered slightly from the airflow. A drop of water from the tipped bottle crept outward in a thin line, reflecting the lights like a small blade. The seal glanced toward the others for a fraction of a second, checking their faces, measuring what they expected. He found nothing. Their expressions stayed neutral, but their eyes were locked. He turned back to Bruce with a tighter jaw. Bruce Siff's gaze did not change. There was no threat in it, yet it held the weight of a decision already made. The seal raised his hands higher, adjusting his guard, his elbows tucked in, his stance lowered. He looked prepared for violence, but something in his eyes looked like impatience, like he needed the moment to prove something before it slipped away. Bruce lifted his chin slightly, not in pride. In acknowledgement, he did not speak. A man near the far corner cleared his throat and immediately regretted it. He pressed his lips together, as if to seal the sound back inside his mouth. The seal took a half step forward. Bruce did not retreat. The distance between them closed until it felt wrong for a room this small to contain it. Then Bruce did something that made the men watching exchange quick looks without moving their heads. He lowered his eyes, not in submission, down to the seal's feet, his stance, his weight distribution, a brief glance, a quiet reading. Then Bruce lifted his eyes again and held them. The seal's hands twitched, tempted to throw something fast just to break the stillness. Bruce stayed loose, shoulders dropped, arms hanging as if he had no interest in proving anything. The seal's nostrils flared, one slow breath in, one slow breath out. Bruce remained silent, and somehow, in that silence, the seal began to look like the one being measured. One of the seven shifted his footing, the rubber squeaking faintly. The seal heard it, felt it. His focus sharpened with urgency. He leaned forward a fraction, about to launch. Bruce finally moved, only an inch. A small turn of his body, angling his center away while keeping his eyes on the seal's face. The kind of movement that said, "I see you." The seal froze for a heartbeat. Then his mouth opened, as if he might speak again. Bruce Sipp's expression stayed calm. The room waited for words. None came. The seal made his choice without saying it. His hands lifted, his weight drove forward. And the first real moment of contact was about to happen. Mark had learned early that hesitation got people hurt. He grew up in a house where silence meant anger and movement meant survival. By 18, he had already decided that strength would be the thing no one could ever take from him again. He trained his body until it obeyed without question. He learned to function while exhausted, to think while afraid, to move while injured. By the time he earned his trident, pain had become familiar. Doubt had become something to bury. Every room he entered after that followed the same pattern. Eyes noticed him. Postures adjusted. Space opened. He never asked for it. It simply happened. Operations reinforced it. Long nights, cold water, controlled breathing under pressure. He learned to trust force because force had kept him alive. He learned that the man who hesitated was the man who did not come home. So when he heard about Bruce Lee, it did not land as admiration. It landed as friction. An actor teaching fighters. A small man spoken about in quiet tones. Stories passed between units about speed and strange precision, about how he made grown men feel slow. Mark did not dismiss it, but he did not accept it either. He had spent years building himself into something unbreakable. He had dragged teammates through surf when their legs failed. He had carried wounded men across ground that wanted to kill them. He had stared into eyes that did not blink back. And now here he was, standing in front of someone who did not look dangerous. That was what unsettled him. Bruce did not carry himself like a man who needed to dominate space. His shoulders were relaxed. His hands rested low. His breathing was almost invisible. Mark could not read him. That bothered Mark more than any aggressive posture ever had. Behind Mark's eyes, old pressure stirred, the familiar urge to define the hierarchy of the room, to establish where everyone stood, not because he enjoyed confrontation, because clarity kept things safe, because uncertainty got people hurt. He told himself this was professional curiosity, but beneath that was something older. He wanted to know if this man was real. He wanted to know if the stories were exaggerated. He wanted to know whether calm like that could exist in a world that taught you to stay hard. Mark rolled his shoulders again. He felt the tension in his neck, the quiet burn in his calves from holding position too long. Bruce waited. Mark studied Bruce's eyes and found no challenge there, only attention. The kind that does not rush, For the first time since stepping onto the mat, Mark noticed his own breathing. He did not like that. He had come here to test a theory. He had not expected to feel seen. Mark leaned forward slightly, preparing to move. Bruce did not shift. The 7 witnesses felt it at the same time. Whatever this was, it had already stopped being a demonstration. It was becoming something personal. Mark moved first, not recklessly, not with rage. He stepped in with a probing right, a controlled strike meant to test distance and draw a reaction. The kind of opening that had set up countless engagements before. Bruce Sepp's head shifted maybe 2 inches. Mark Sepp's fist passed through empty air. Before Mark could register the miss, Bruce's hand moved. It was not a swing. It was a straight line, a short vertical punch that traveled barely the length of Mark's forearm. It landed in the center of Mark Sepp's chest. No windup, no visible tension, just impact. Mark felt the breath leave his body in a single sharp burst. His forward momentum stopped like he had walked into a wall. His feet slid back half a step without his permission. His hands dropped instinctively toward his ribs. The room made a sound without realizing it. Not a shout, a collective intake of breath. Bruce Sepp's hand was already back at his side. He stood exactly where he had been. Mark blinked. The strike had not felt heavy. It had felt precise, like pressure applied to something internal that did not want to be touched. Mark forced air back into his lungs. His eyes narrowed. He reset his stance. Bruce waited. Mark threw a jab. Bruce slipped it. Mark followed with a cross. Bruce redirected it with a small turn of his left hand, guiding the punch past his shoulder. Mark committed to a left hook. It never arrived. Bruce stepped inside Mark's guard and delivered a palm strike upward under Mark's jaw. Mark Sepp's head snapped back. His knees dipped. For a moment he existed between falling and standing, his nervous system trying to decide what story to tell his body. Bruce could have finished it there. Everyone in the room knew that. Instead, Bruce stepped back. He returned to his original position. Hands low, breathing steady. He waited. Mark shook his head hard, trying to clear the ringing behind his eyes. His mouth tasted metallic. He swallowed once, then again. He stared at Bruce. Something had shifted. The certainty he had walked in with had cracked, not shattered, cracked. Mark took a breath and advanced again. Slower this time. He threw 2 quick punches, both missed by margins so small they felt intentional. Bruce Sepp's movements were minimal. No wasted motion. Mark felt the unfamiliar sensation of chasing instead of controlling. He tried to close distance, stepping forward with his weight committed. Bruce angled his body just enough to let Mark pass slightly off-center. At the same time, Bruce's leg swept low behind Mark's front ankle. Mark Sepp's base disappeared. His own momentum carried him forward. He hit the mat hard on his shoulder and hip. Before Mark could orient himself, Bruce was above him. A fist stopped an inch from Mark Sepp's throat. Not striking, hovering. The pause lasted 1 second. It was enough. Bruce withdrew his hand and stepped back again. Mark pushed himself up, breathing heavier now. A thin line of blood marked the corner of his mouth. He wiped it away and stared at his fingers. Bruce said nothing. The room remained silent. Mark rose to his feet. His eyes held something new. Not anger, recognition, and the fight was no longer about proving strength. It was about refusing to accept what was already happening. Bruce did not pursue. He did not advance. He stood where he was and waited. That choice unsettled Mark more than any strike. Mark rolled his shoulders again, trying to loosen the tightness creeping into his left side. His breathing had changed, shorter, less controlled. He circled, forcing his legs to cooperate, eyes never leaving Bruce. Bruce followed him only with his gaze. No stance, no guard, just presence. One of the 7 shifted his weight. Another crossed his arms, then uncrossed them. Somewhere behind them, a shoe squeaked faintly against the mat. Bruce remained still. Mark lifted his leg and threw a low kick toward Bruce's lead thigh, borrowing from techniques he had learned from visiting Muay Thai instructors. The kick landed against Bruce's shin. Bruce absorbed it without reaction. As Mark's leg began to retract, Bruce's rear foot drove forward. A side kick. Straight, clean. It connected just below Mark Sepp's hip. Mark Sepp's left side shut down instantly. His leg buckled. He stumbled sideways and caught himself against the shoulder of one of the observers who froze, unsure whether to support him or step away. Mark pushed off and turned back toward Bruce. He was limping now. Bruce said nothing. Mark tried to steady himself, planting his feet wider, drawing on whatever pride he had left. "That all you got?" Mark managed, though the words came out strained. Bruce tilted his head slightly, not in mockery, in assessment. "You are hurt," Bruce said quietly. Mark swallowed. His jaw tightened. "This does not need to continue." Mark shook his head once. "I decide when it ends." Bruce nodded slowly. "Then you have decided." Mark lunged. He reached forward, trying to clinch, hoping to drag Bruce into close quarters where size mattered more than timing. His hands found air. Bruce had already stepped aside. Mark Sepp's momentum carried him past. Bruce's elbow rose in a short arc and connected with Mark's temple. The sound was sharp. Mark dropped to one knee. His eyes went glassy. He reached for the mat with both hands, his nervous system struggling to keep him upright. Bruce stood over him. He did not touch him. He did not speak. The silence expanded. Lieutenant Commander Hammond stepped forward, relief in his voice. "Enough." Mark stayed on one knee, breathing hard. Then, with a grunt that came from somewhere deep, he pushed himself back to his feet. He swayed. His guard was gone. He threw a right hand, slow, desperate. Bruce did not strike back. He caught Mark's wrist, redirected the punch past his own shoulder, stepped behind him and applied pressure just below Mark's ear. Mark Sepp's body stiffened, then collapsed. He hit the mat without resistance. The room stopped breathing. Bruce released Mark Sepp's wrist and stepped away. Mark lay still, chest rising shallowly, eyes half open. No one moved. Bruce picked up his towel, wiped his hands, calmly. The power in the room had changed completely, and Mark Hale was no longer the strongest man in it. Mark came back slowly. His eyelids fluttered first, then his fingers twitched. Lieutenant Commander Hammond knelt beside him, one hand steady on Mark Sepp's chest, the other near his shoulder. "Easy," he said quietly. "Take it slow." Mark drew in a shallow breath. Then another, his eyes opened fully, unfocused at first. The ceiling lights swam. Sound returned in fragments. The hum of ventilation, a distant door closing, the soft shuffle of boots. Memory arrived in pieces. His gaze found Bruce. Something passed across Mark Sepp's face. Not anger, something heavier. He tried to sit up. Hammond helped him, guiding him to a seated position on the edge of the mat. Mark wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. His pride was bruised, his body hurt, but what unsettled him most was the quiet clarity settling in his chest. He looked at Bruce and shook his head slightly. "I couldn't even touch you." Bruce walked toward him. The men instinctively parted. Bruce stopped a few feet away and waited until Mark met his eyes. "You are strong," Bruce said. His voice carried no judgment. "You are trained, you have experience most men will never know." Mark swallowed. "But you fought with your body," Bruce continued. He lifted one finger and tapped his own temple. "Not with this." Mark frowned. "What does that mean?" Bruce crouched so they were level. "You decided who I was before we began. You decided what you needed to do to beat me." Mark stared at the floor for a moment, then back at Bruce. "You fought the man you expected," Bruce said. "Not the man who was here." The room was silent. Mark Sepp's jaw tightened. He looked away. "I built everything on being the hardest man in the room," he said quietly. "If I am not that, what am I?" Bruce stood. He extended his hand. Mark hesitated. Then he took it. Bruce helped him to his feet with surprising ease. "That question," Bruce said, "is not weakness." Mark steadied himself. "That is where real strength begins." A medic arrived and checked Mark's pupils, asked his name, the date. Mark answered automatically. He waved away further attention, insisting he was fine. The session was over. The men began gathering their gear, speaking softly, but no one rushed to leave. Bruce retrieved his bag and began packing with careful movements. Hammond approached him. "I should apologize." Bruce shook his head. He needed this. Hammond studied him. "You think he learned something?" Bruce closed his bag. "I think he now has the chance." Across the room, Mark sat on a bench, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. Bruce watched him for a moment. Then he walked over. "You drop your right hand after you jab," Bruce said. "And when you get frustrated, you commit too much forward." Mark looked up, startled. "You are giving me advice?" "I am telling you what I saw." Mark nodded slowly. Bruce paused. 15 years ago, Bruce said, "I was you. Mark listened. I thought winning was becoming complete. Bruce met his eyes. It is not. He placed a small paper in Mark Sepp's hand. If you are ever in Los Angeles, Bruce said, come train, not to fight. Mark closed his fingers around the paper. They shook hands, not as opponents, something else. Mark stayed seated after the others began to drift away. His gear sat untouched beside him. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a heavy stillness in his muscles. His left hip throbbed. His temple pulsed with a dull ache, but it was not his body that kept him there. It was the quiet. He turned the small paper over in his hands, tracing the address Bruce had written. The ink was neat, direct, no wasted lines. Lieutenant Commander Hammond sat beside him. How are you feeling? Mark did not answer right away. He stared at the floor between his boots. I have been under fire, Mark finally said. I have felt rounds pass close enough to feel heat. I have watched men bleed out. He paused. None of that shook me. Hammond waited. Mark touched his chest. This did. Hammond nodded once. You think he scared you? Mark shook his head. Not what he did, what he showed me. Across the room, Bruce finished packing his bag. He moved with the same calm precision he had shown on the mat. A few of the younger operators watched him quietly, unsure what to say. Bruce paused at the door. He looked back. Mark felt it before he saw it. Bruce crossed the room and stopped a few feet from him. You have good structure, Bruce said. Your instincts are honest. Mark lifted his head. But you carry too much weight here. Bruce touched his own chest lightly. And when you fight from that place, you become predictable. Mark nodded. I thought being unbreakable was the goal. Bruce was quiet for a moment. It is not. One of the younger men sitting nearby leaned forward slightly, listening without meaning to. Fighting is a vehicle, Bruce continued, not the destination. Mark exhaled slowly. To what? Bruce met his eyes. To knowing who you are when you do not need to prove it. Mark absorbed that in silence. Bruce shouldered his bag. What you felt today, Bruce said, was not defeat. Mark looked up. It was clarity. Bruce extended his hand again. Mark stood and took it. This time his grip was different. The door closed behind Bruce. The room felt larger. 6 months later, Mark stood inside a modest training space in Los Angeles. Concrete floors. Mirrors on one wall, a wooden dummy in the corner. Bruce greeted him with a nod. They did not spar. They explored movement, balance, timing, principles. At the end of the session, Mark asked the question that had stayed with him since San Diego. Were you ever in danger? Bruce considered it. Danger exists in every fight. Mark waited, but I was not worried. Why? Because I knew you before you moved. Mark frowned. My assumptions, Bruce said. Your patterns, your need to win. Bruce met his eyes. You were fighting me. Mark nodded. I was fighting the truth of the situation. Bruce placed a hand on Mark Sepp's shoulder. The truth always wins. Years later, when Bruce Lee was gone, Mark would not remember movie scenes or headlines. He would remember silence, a still room, a calm man who did not raise his voice, and the moment everything he thought made him strong quietly fell away.